Hello, English 12, this is Mrs. Like. Today you will be taking notes over medieval England from 1066 to 1485 AD. It was during this time period of 1066 that we see the end of the Old English time period and the beginning of what was referred to as the Middle English time period. During this time, there were changes in culture, in language, and in the environment and in the way that the country of England was run. The Normans had settled in what became Normandy in northwest France. The Normans were Northmen or Norsemen. They were Vikings who came down, conquered northwest France, and then later that region was named Normandy because it was Norman land. It was where they lived. They invaded England in 1066, replacing King Harold II, who was a Saxon king ruling over England. William the Conqueror was the Duke of Normandy at this time, and he took the position of King William I of England, and he ruled in England for 21 years. During this time period, the king and King William and his followers became the most powerful force in England, and this created the largest change in land ownership to ever take place in the history of the country of England. The government was set up on a feudal system. The feudal system had a very definite caste system, and there was no moving from between the ranks. Within the feudal system, only kings, lords, and dukes, or the wealthy upper class, owned the land. If you were a peasant or a serf, you were actually owned by the landowner. You were property. Martial law was put into effect. It was a system of very clearly defined laws, rules, and authority, and the ultimate authority was the king. During this time period, the law of primogeniture was also established. This basically is the belief that the firstborn had exclusive rights to inherit land, titles, and estates from his father. It was the serf and the peasant who were not allowed to inherit anything. They had nothing to inherit. The land was owned by the king's lords and dukes, and they were owned also by the king's lords and dukes. So when a king passed away, his land and the serfs who worked that land became the property of his firstborn son. During this time period, there were quite a few kings and rulers who came and went. Of the Norman kings, starting with William I, there was William the Conqueror, William I, William II, Henry I, and Stephen. Following the Norman kings was a family with the last name Plantagenet, and the Plantagenet kings were Henry II, Richard I, who was called Richard the Lionhearted, John, and Henry III. The monarchs of England and Wales following them were Edward I, Edward II, Edward III, and Richard II. The House of Lancaster came next with Henry IV, Henry V, and Henry VI, followed by the House of York with Edward VI, Edward IV, Edward V, and Richard III. I want you to take a moment and notice the picture that is on the background here, and this is actually a photo of Robin Hood and his merry men. If you will recall from that time period, it was actually during the Plantagenet kings when Richard the Lionhearted, Richard I, and John were the kings of England that the story of Robin Hood originated. And Robin Hood was fighting against the fact that John had established rules and laws demanding taxation of the people, and he was very harsh to the common man during this time period. So Robin Hood actually is an element from this time period also of medieval England. Education during medieval England was basically provided by the church. The church was librarian of and teacher of all of society. The abbeys and monasteries were the centers of learning, and typically the only children who were educated to read and write were those who were sent to the church. Language of the church at this time period was Latin, and in 1200 AD, The very first universities were established in Europe. It was the founding of Oxford and Cambridge universities, which actually are still there today. These were colleges for higher education, but they were established as self-sufficient farms, so they provided for themselves. It was in Canterbury Cathedral that Thomas A. Becket actually was murdered. Thomas A. Becket was the Lord Chancellor to Henry II. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. There was an argument between Henry II and Thomas A. Becket, and Thomas A. Becket questioned that Henry II had any authority to say or do what he was trying to do to the people of England. Because he stood up and defended the church against the king, he was murdered December 29th, 1170 AD, and he was murdered actually in the church, on the altar in the church. So he was considered a martyr, and a martyr is someone who is murdered or killed for his faith. He was canonized a saint by the church, the Roman Catholic Church, and he became a religious hero. The Canterbury Cathedral and Thomas A. Becket are central to the reading that you will be doing today as you look at the pieces of the Canterbury Tales written by Geoffrey Chaucer. You will be looking at that today. Make sure you take your notes and be ready to follow through with the next pieces. Thank you.